All right. That's it. We're live. So we didn't have this last week because of well, I didn't have anything done for last week. It feels like it was a U.S. holiday, and so we decided to cancel. But we are back and with a lot of strength and renovated energy. So first, I want to highlight a bunch of issues that I think that are kind of very impactful. One was already committed, which is the fact that we are no longer allowing people to get confused by using the JSON API format inside of REST. So with REST UI, you will not get an API JSON format, or you shouldn't. I don't know the internals of the module, but definitely you shouldn't see it. But in any case, if you try to use Node 1 format API JSON, you will get a 406, I think, with
Yep.
non-acceptable format. So I think that will help a lot with DX. And so people will wonder, oh, then how do I use JSON API? And actually go to the documentation.
Yep.
So that's one. And the other one is the famous do not require underscore format, which I don't know if we're going to be able to land.
Yeah, that's the one. That's the only thing I've written down in this piece of paper as the one I wanted to talk about, because it's not clear how we need to or can continue there on that one. So that's yeah, the one up for debate.
So I feel like there's no technical solution. Let's not even consider maintainability or complexity. Even if we went like batshit crazy complex, would we be able to handle all cases? I don't think so.
I think we can. I think the solutions that Daniel Wehner and I proposed are not able to do that. So they cannot solve everything because they run too late. We try to use our existing routing system, and so try to do things the proper way. But unfortunately, the proper way, the way that the Symfony router is built, it assumes in a very deep way that the format is always specified on the request itself. So either in a request parameter or in an extension. So something like node /1.json or .xml, or in the accept request header. And either one of those, so a request parameter, an extension to the path essentially, or an accept header, they all require you to send the format. The thing is that we kind of want to remove that requirement. And so then I think the only solution for everything to work correctly, including error handling and so on, is the one that you proposed, which works at a far earlier stage, which basically just checks, hey, does this incoming request have a path that starts with /JSON API? And if so, set the format to API_JSON and call.
However, but that is brittle, right?
Is it? In what way could it possibly break other code? Like, what code can possibly be using the JSON API path prefix?
So we cannot ensure a prefix, like check a route that starts with /JSON API because for instance, language prefixes. And,
yeah, okay. That's the one thing I wasn't certain about. Yeah, that hasn't run at that point. Yep.
So if anyone had a vanity URL that contained a /JSON API, something like /blog /JSON API dash sucks, yep, because they are very angry at us, then it would set the parameter format for them, and they would realize how much it does.
But we can mitigate that, I think, by so the only feasible or realistically occurring use case is language negotiation via a path prefix. Path prefixes for language negotiation are always 2 characters. So I think we can pretty easily apply a regular expression to the incoming path and check does it start with /JSON API? Then it is a JSON API request. Or does it start with 2 characters followed by /JSON API? Then it's also a JSON API request. And I know that's hacky, but it would work.
Yeah.
So,
but then, it's the same thing. Like if I don't have a language negotiation, but I do have like a very short URL alias that contains 2 characters, it still breaks. And also, I think that pattern is reusable. Like just like the language negotiation uses a URL prefix, so could a module like domain or any other that wants to establish a realm based on the request, and theoretically use that same pattern and define their language prefix.
So wouldn't all requests a JSON API have /JSON API/? Like
but even then, that's kind of what Matteo was saying. Like it could be /JSON API/socks or something like.
Yeah, but I mean,
yeah, I agree.
You could do a warning though in the status page. I mean, the aliases right ahead of time. I mean, you can look to see if that alias exists. Because for a lot of sites, it would be nice not to have to do it. But I mean, it would still work if they sent the format in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, this is another idea that I've had for a while, but I don't think I proposed it on the issue because it presents a fair change of direction. So the thing is, ideally, we would be using the accept request header, but we cannot, and Drupal core does not for very good reason, because it allows intermediaries, so proxies, to be polluted because they are often not capable of correctly handling varying according to the accept header, and then things break horribly because you may be requesting HTML and get JSON or vice versa. So that's why we don't do that. However, since everything is so in JSON API, everything has a JSON API path prefix. So for us, we're never going to serve anything else than the JSON API format from our routes, from those URLs. Therefore, we could say, for JSON API, you must actually send request headers. Sorry, you must send the accept JSON API request header. Then everything works. So error handling and so on work. And there is no problem. It's just then that JSON API is different from the rest of core. But of course, core has that need to support any format, and JSON API has its own routes, and those routes are, by definition, hard-coded to only support the JSON API format. So that would solve the problem, and we could enforce it by checking if the accept request header is not set, and then complain. So that we always encourage the right behavior. And everything actually, as far as I know, for example, in Ember already does this. And it's actually the thing that everyone outside of Drupal would assume that is necessary. So that's the only alternative I can think of.
Well, it's still, I mean, if I was going to choose technology, one that I know that it may break for some people and I wouldn't even know about because it is stripping the accept header, I wouldn't choose it. However, we could have the accept header be what makes it possible to have 403s on routes and 404s to have a nicely formatted JSON API error output.
And those would not be cached anyway, nor by those proxies, so that wouldn't cause problems.
Right. So if you can send the header, if you cannot, no big deal. It will only fail because of proxies or whatever on 404s and 403s, in which case you should be just fine with inspecting the error code, because what are you gonna look for in a 404 in the body, right? It's a 404. I couldn't find it. I will not tell you anything else about that, right?
Yeah. So I don't think actually that it would break for. So if you have a proxy in between that would be stripping an accept header, which it doesn't. I don't think it would break at all. I think the only way that it could possibly break is if you allow anonymous access. And in that case, a 403 or 404 is served to a anonymous user. So there is no cookie, there is no basic auth header, there is nothing. So it's perfectly cacheable. And only then, I think, is it going to be a problem. Plus, when you're using authentication, you actually should probably be using HTTPS. HTTPS responses also cannot be cached by proxies. So that also further mitigates the problem. So the problem is limited to anonymous users and when your API is served over HTTP and not HTTPS.
Right, yes. In any case, if there is a possibility to break, I was assuming that it would, placing ourselves in the worst case scenario, but you're right. So this to me sounds like colon, first point. Sorry, I'm trying to organize my thoughts.
Yeah.
We should add a route filter that sets the format just as we did in one of the patches. We may even be able to commit one of those or start reviewing one of those and have a follow-up to take the accept header. So because those are like two independent issues, right? Those could be fixed independently. So we set the format at two different moments with the accept header, and then implicitly we force it. Whatever you set, even if you use the accept header to set a wrong format for JSON API, if you're requesting or posting to a JSON API route, you're posting and requesting JSON API. That should be like, in case of conflict, I should say that the route is what has the more context. So setting it hard-coded in a route filter would be step 1, and step 2 would be just allow the accept header to do its magic.
And so step 1, so as long as step 1 is only in, that means that successful responses will work just fine, as you would expect. But for 3 responses, for 3 responses
to the route.
Yes, exactly. So for a 3 thrown by JSON API itself, for example, because an entity is not accessible, that will still work just fine. It's only if something breaks very early, then things will break. And that will be fixed once the accept header support goes in. To me, that sounds fairly reasonable. It also brings the JSON API module, and when JSON API lands in Drupal 8, it brings Drupal 8 in a place where it is more REST-like, if you will. We can't fix it in the core REST module for the reasons we said before. So, but do we all feel good with that? What does that thing, for example?
I feel good with it. Sorry, Ted.
Yeah, I was new to the problem. I guess I hadn't seen this issue. It seems like if that's so, is that just bringing it in line with the regular format that other people, as far as like making clients for JSON API schema out, is that what it wants? Is the accept header and not something in the query string?
We're trying to remove the redundancy between sending a path prefix of JSON API and sending the format. We want the path prefix. We know that we want it and we like it, so we're trying to remove the need of it. The problem is that by the time that we know that this is a JSON API route, some errors may have happened. So we need to format those errors. So,
yeah.
You know, it's
the accept, but you have to send the accept header in this case too, right? Like,
if you don't send it, everything will work except for 404 payload formatting and 403 on the route. Like if someone wants to disable a resource, the only way that they can do it now is either by disabling entity access or by disabling access on the route themselves, like altering the route. So by altering the route,
we're not just swapping one out for the other. You could potentially use it without the header, but a header is more what people expect to use outside of Drupal.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So if you're a good boy and send a header, or girl and send a header, we guarantee other stuff, extra niceties to work. If you don't, it's okay. We love you anyways, and we're gonna give you most of it.
Yeah, and if you do things otherwise correctly, as in you're not requesting stuff that doesn't exist, then we'll still give you what you want. But yes, Matteo, you put that very well.
Okay, so that being out of the way, I think it was the thorniest issue.
Definitely,
there was some stuff that was added recently, and the next conflictive issue, not conflictive, but the next one that may have more differing opinions is language support. So we committed a patch that will let you just use the regular core negotiation, non-judgmentally on how REST you are. And if you choose to use a non-REST friendly negotiation strategy, like the path prefix, it will just work, but you theoretically, well, not theoretically, you end up with two resources, the resource in Catalan and the resource in English, with two different URLs, which is not very REST-like, but that is some site configuration. If you want to be REST compliant, there is nothing that prevents you from negotiating the format using the accept language header, or using a subdomain. So that would be different APIs, one for Catalan and the other one for English. And therefore, since they are separate APIs, they would be REST compliant, or just not care all that much. And if it's not super REST holy, like JSON API is not super REST holy, and its own is leaning towards the practical land. This just adds to that, but it has its own drawbacks. I don't think that this approach is right for the REST module in core, though.
So the thing I didn't understand was you said accept language, but that's not yet supported, or that's the plan, or how does that play out?
No, I mean that the language negotiation is I don't want to say it's pluggable, because I don't know if those are plugins, but definitely you can write your own language negotiation strategy.
Yes, and they actually are plugins. So
right, so you could write a plugin yourself or contribute it that uses the REST-friendly way, which is use the accept language header.
And we actually already have that in core.
Oh, we have it. Yes. Oh, I didn't even know about this.
Yeah, it's called confusingly language negotiation browser, because the browser, if you specify, like if I'm using it, I would be using my computer in Dutch, then the browser is in Dutch, and the browser will also send accept language NL for Dutch. So that's already supported. It's just not enabled by default, because currently, unfortunately, it kills the page cache, which is fine, I think, for us, because we still have the dynamic page cache also to back us up. But there is an issue to make that properly cacheable. But for now, that hasn't been solved yet. But I think that's acceptable.
So I think that it certainly allows you, like things as they are now, it certainly allows you to set up your site as something that would make some purists cringe with the REST setup. But it also allows you to do it in a way that they would be like more comfortable to sit in the same room as you are. So
yeah, so the only problem is that if you install JSON API on a Drupal 8 site and you want to use translations, then by default you will not be able to use the accept language header because this particular language negotiation plugin is not actually enabled by default. So you would have to go into the language modules settings and enable that particular negotiation method, and only then it would start working. So that's kind of annoying or unfortunate. But the reason Drupal 8 shipped with that is precisely because it kills page caching. And of course, it's painful if every single response of Drupal, including HTML responses, cannot be cached anymore in a page cache. That would be very costly for us. So maybe we need a way for the JSON API module to automatically enable that language negotiation plugin, but then mucking with existing configuration is also kind of not done. So I'm not sure what the best way to balance those things is.
And anyways, I mean, this feels like, at this point, at least, more a documentation thing.
Yes, for now that seems like the easiest way. Like if you want to accept language, enable that language negotiation plugin, and you're done.
Exactly. And to be honest, I think that we may already be able to anticipate which people will go that route in the whole Drupal community, because the rest, the vast majority, may not care about it all that much.
Yeah, it would be great to have that document, and perhaps test coverage to show that, hey, this actually does work with the JSON API module.
Okay.
And by the way, the official entity resource translation support, so for core REST, has also been moving forward, but it's not yet finished, sadly.
Oh.
But so that has been moving forward. Birdir Sasha has been working on that. And so hopefully that will end up being fixed soon-ish. But in the past week, he hasn't touched it anymore. But the week before that, he works actively on it. But hopefully that will mean less work on the JSON API side, or less special codes to maintain at least.
All right.
That is progressing as in it just accepts whatever negotiation.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and it's for now it's mostly about adding test coverage, but then there's also strange things in how the default normalizer, so in the serialization module, handle it versus how the hell normalization handles it, because the hell normalization actually tries to it iterates for every field over all available languages, and then puts every single field that has a translation, it puts that into the normalization itself. So it's actually, in the hell normalization, not entirely clear how you should be updating a single translation, for example. So that's kind of tricky stuff there. So it's almost more about adding test coverage for those cases, because it actually already works. It's just that nobody knows how they're supposed to use it, because it's very difficult, or it's fairly difficult to figure out.
Right. Yeah. Only some dedicated individuals that would post something close to the reality and then step-by-step debug into it would get it right.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. So those are the two things that I had. It feels like it's the same that you may have had in your list. Is there anything else that you want to talk about?
Nope. I had two more issues that are, well, one is RTBC, that is simplifying exception and error handling in JSON API, and then a follow-up to that makes JSON API's handling of serialization, and when serialization actually happens of a JSON API response, makes it the same as the core REST module, and so then code is consistent across the two, and there's less special stuff in the JSON API module. And now I've been working again on the query parameter handling of JSON API and making that more strict and more tested, so that hopefully there's less chance of breakage. Because that's as far as I can see, a fairly often post support request, how to use filters correctly. It's kind of difficult to figure out at the moment. So hopefully my work will lead to better documentation and test coverage for that stuff.
Yeah, I feel like we should be able to be more helpful with the error messages, but since this is such a flexible system and we don't know all of the possible field names that Drupal installation may have, or it's not reasonable just to validate a filter to load them, I think that there is more documentation confusion than anything else. I wasn't able to find any legit bug in all of those support requests. I found a bug on entity query though.
Yeah, I saw that. But I personally also have not been able to figure out how, like, given a entity type and given me looking at the PHP code and looking at which properties are within which field, I personally cannot figure out how to correctly use the filtering system in JSON API. Like, I can't find it. So even basic documentation about the reasoning that you must apply, like apply this syntax to filter on fields, then this one to filter on an item within a field, and then this one to filter on a property within an item within a field, like that would be super, super valuable. And it would solve, I think, 80%, if not more, of the support requests.
Yeah, I agree.
That could be like a few lines in the README, and you would be like lots of concerns would be gone, I think.
I agree. That is totally fair. Sadly, I had to get used to this filtering strategy because that was Gabe's time donation to the module was to implement that. However, I added something on top of that, which is to be able to filter by properties on a field at the end of the chain. So I only made it more confusing, but.
It's fine, but it would be very valuable if you could just spend, like, I don't know how much time it would cost, but literally only adding a few lines to the README, that would be super valuable, because it would also allow me to add more test coverage and better understand why it works the current way, and maybe point out flaws, and maybe not point out flaws, but explain and document it more clearly for somebody, as somebody who doesn't have any experience building the actual filtering system. And so I don't know the intricate details, so people like me and Ted would be able to make it more clear, probably.
If there's something in the README that said, like, if you just use like the default install profile with like articles and said, oh, this is how you could filter for the body or for a tag, that would probably be really helpful.
Yeah, body probably not so much, but tag and and maybe user, like the author.
I would say the city where the author of the article lives, because that
even better.
Yeah, because that kind of makes it through nesting, and then when you get to the address field, you need to filter based on a property on a field.
Yeah, what you just described, I have no idea at all how to even begin doing that.
Okay, cool. I assume that you have seen the spec for the extension of the filtering system?
Yes, at some point.
Okay, cool. Because that means that wasn't clarifying. I'll try to find some other words, or maybe just examples are good enough to.
Examples alone will already help a lot. Yeah.
All right. Cool. So, unless you have anything else, do you have anything else?
Nope.
Cool. So my focus will be whenever I find some bandwidth, which is very rare these days, but I will at some point find some bandwidth again. I want to work in 2 different things, and those may have some impact on the JSON API module as is. I was about to say JSON API core, but anyways. So one is being able to have site builders shape a little bit the API by providing some sort of configuration entities that can, you get a text box and select list of all the fields, and you say, all right, now this field is not going to be called field underscore body, but it's going to be called body.
Yep.
And something very simple, just like that. And that will also, if that would even be possible, but that would also be responsible of telling you which field normalizer is using. So if you need to customize the output of a field, or how to take input from that field, what normalizer you need to win to, so.
Yep. And that would be just, so the first one is actually configuration, so that you can change the alias, or you can alias certain fields.
Yeah.
That makes
and
sense.
Also disable some.
Okay, that could be problematic if you are going to update things, though, because if a field is disabled, as in not exposed, and then you patch or post one, and you also omit a field, then you could get a validation error.
Yeah. I mean, there would be some responsibility offloading to the site builder, like
And the second thing about showing which fields are being normalized by which normalizers, is that just pure information? Like
that would be pure information.
Okay.
It could even be in the same page, like the page of the list is all the fields that you have enabled.
Mm-hmm.
It tells you, like, in a separate column, it tells you, by the way, this is the field that is actually how it's actually called in core. This is how you are calling it, and this is the normalizer that you need to modify, or that is currently being used for to customize the output. Maybe you want to just get rid of some weird markup that editors tend to post. So go there and put your regular expression.
So are you planning to add all this to the JSON API module itself, or to a separate module?
No, I don't want to add more to the JSON API module.
Okay. Yeah, because that would have been my concern, that it could complicate things. But yeah, as long as it's separate, we could eventually move it in. For sure.
But that may have some impact, because I would need to decouple the, I have an abstraction to allow having output field names and internal field names, and so on. And the same for URL aliases.
Yeah, but that all sounds good, to be honest. Like, that would only lead to more decoupled and more separation of concerns and so on.
Exactly.
So I don't think that's going to be a problem.
I think it's actually going to result in something useful. And also another one that I want is to be able to use sub requests to make internal JSON API calls.
Okay.
So
what are you going to use that for?
So, for instance, that could be useful for an experiment or pet project, whatever you want to call it, that Daniel is working on, to be able to have some super simple syntax in a Twig template that would get data and allow you to do this. And it would be pretty nice, because if you combine this with Twig.js, then when you are in front-end mode, Twig.js makes the actual HTTP call, but when you are rendering from the backend, you don't do an HTTP call. You just use the server, right?
Yep. Sounds very cool. Yeah.
So that would be one. The other one would be like a request scheduler of sorts, what we were talking about before. Something like I'm getting a single URL where I get stuff posted, just like GraphQL-ish. So I get a document saying you have to do these 6 requests, and you may do them sequentially. Probably you would do them sequentially because PHP, but But the idea is that you are able to get from the consumer all the requests that they need to do. That otherwise they would need to do them in parallel and send like I don't know, 25 requests or whatever, because you cannot resolve everything in a single request if the starting point is from different resources, right? So if you have a very complex page or design or whatever, like typical enterprise grade JavaScript applications do, they have
isn't you said parallel? Isn't it usually about making sure that you're not waiting in sequence so that you don't have multiple network latency hits?
Yeah. What right now a client would do is multiple parallel requests, because they would do it like from a JavaScript framework or whatever, where they can have a sync behavior. And then however the web server deals with those parallel requests, it's now not their problem. The problem that we're trying to avoid here is that for flaky connections, having one of those being very slow or unreasonably slow is, it will give worse perceived performance and may not be as good as just make one request and say, I want all these requests done. But instead of sending HTTP requests, you send JSON objects that represent those HTTP requests. We build them up as sub requests in Drupal and get them all processed and return them. So you reduce the chance of bad connection. And also, you may have better cache hit ratios, so you don't actually have to make many of those requests. Like you can save the HTTP round trip because you have it in page cache, but you don't need to make an HTTP request because you're already in the server. So things like that. The bottom line is that I would be able to, in random PHP code, say, this is my resource, these are my filters, this is my whatever context, right? I want you to execute this operation using JSON API.
Cool. Yeah, I can see it being useful in Twig and having it automatically work in Twig.js. And I have the same exact Twig template also work in PHP. That sounds very powerful. I'm not entirely convinced about how this is going to make things better for high latency spotty network connection use cases, because you can still, well, you could also argue that you're you're betting everything on a single request, and if that request fails, then nothing is happening on the server side yet, and so things are slower then. So I don't know the exact details, but that sounds less convincing to me, but everything else definitely does make sense.
Right. The main idea is that probably Drupal is going to sit behind Node.js proxy in many cases, because they will use an isomorphic app with Ember or React or whatever. So this proxy can have an intermediate cache and can save some of those requests by just inspecting. I have my local cache for this request, so I'm not going to make it. So we have a centralized cache in that proxy layer.
But that would be even less of a reason then to have everything batched together in a single request, because then you can no longer cache the individual responses to the individual requests, or you would have to demultiplex them. But at that point, if it's just a local request to a local, you don't have the network latency anymore. So then at that point, it seems like you're adding unnecessary complexity, but it sounds like you have more use cases than the Node.js proxy one.
Anyways,
yeah.
I actually should get going. It's a use case that we have, and also a big concern is that not all of the consumer technologies are great with dealing with many parallel requests.
That
So,
I can definitely see.
Being able to aggregate them, like tvOS is not great with doing that. I know.
Yep.
I don't want to say another TV technology, but Roku is not good doing that,
Yep.
and so on. So.
All right. Well,
See my
that's
background
a
there.
very good example then.
And I was also able to, or at least in my typical setup, to see a performance improvement for high latency networks in some scenarios. But anyways.
Great.
So yeah, bottom line, I want to be able to do that. Random PHP code, specify all the JSON API context, and get a response and continue with the flux. And that should harden or improve our programmatic APIs, I think.
Yes.
As well.
Yep. Sounds great. I'll be working on the format thing and on the further work to make JSON API more solid. And then hopefully in the not too distant future, we'll be able to get the proposed JSON API as experimental in 8.4 issue going again.
Yeah, we have that a little bit abandoned because not much is going to happen anyways, and it should apply cleanly. Just, hey, this is all the things that happen, this list of issues. We have those, right? So.
Yep. All right. Thanks for the updates. And good luck with the rest of the day.
Yeah, you too. Have a nice day.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.